Hey, Fabricators, welcome back to Advancing Fabric, where we're going to talk more about Microsoft Fabric today. Specifically, we want to talk about OneLake. Now, from all of the original first announcements we saw, there's been this common message that OneLake sits underneath all of the different experiences. It's the OneDrive for data, or lakes. It's a really nice, easy way to manage lakes, so you only have one of them rather than lots and lots of lakes, but how does it actually work? So that's the plan today. We're going to take a look at OneLake. We're going to see the different ways you can kind of lift the lid in Fabric and see where your files and folders and things sit, and then how you actually interact with them, what that looks like, and how it actually works. That is the plan. Now, as always, if you are new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, let us know what you're interested in learning. Let us know what you're trying to get hold of in terms of Fabric, and we might do another video in the future. So, first things first, I'm going to welcome back our chief fabricator, Craig. Welcome back.
Hey.
So you're gonna teach us the ways of the OneLake today, yeah?
Yes. We can take a look at all the details, what's actually there under the hood, how you interact with it, how you find it, and look at all the different options to work with it.
Sounds good. Firstly, the question, is it just OneLake?
Well, yeah, under the hood, it is essentially many different data lake storage Gen 2 accounts that are abstracted away. You don't really get to see them. You don't know how many they are. You don't know where they are. It's abstracted away. Now, that's the kind of thing that could maybe make you nervous if you have data that needs to remain in a specific region, for example. So where you have situations like that, you can lock workspaces to specific regions, and that's going to give you that flexibility to say that this data has to stay in the UK or this data has to stay in another country, for example. But yeah, essentially it's just Data Lake Gen 2 under the hood.
Yeah. So it's a lake that's managed for you, and it looks and feels like a single lake, even if underneath it might not be a single lake, but who actually cares if it looks and feels like a single lake?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. All right, so what are the main questions people have about it? What have you, when you try and talk to someone saying, right, okay, you're going to start off, you've got this OneLake, what do you get from people?
I think most of the questions kind of come up is, well, where is it? How do I see it? How do I interact with it? Like, you're still kind of thinking of that mentality of it's a storage account, so I should be able to open a container and see everything in that storage account. But it's all abstracted away. It's not really like that. And it's all centered around workspaces as being your main kind of plane to interact with the OneLake. So if we jump over to my screen share, we can have a look at it. Yeah, so this is Fabric again. I'm still in the data warehouse view from last time as well. But what we've got down the left-hand side here is a OneLake Data Hub button. And that allows us, once we click in there, that's just a little bit of an explorer for the data artifacts that you have access to. So I can have a look down and I can see, like, I've got access to some Lakehouses, I've got access to some data sets, some warehouses, some SQL endpoints, and it shows me everything I have access to and that I can interrogate from a data perspective. But that still doesn't really give me a feel for what the OneLake is. Now, I mentioned that it's all based around workspaces, and that's kind of where that layer is. So if I come into workspaces, I can see I've got access to quite a few different workspaces here, and the ones that are attached to Fabric are essentially, or our premium licensing, is our EU sales. We've got UK sales, US sales there, and these are our main kind of workspaces that I'll be working in and that I've got data and I'm working with. So that's where I would interact with the OneLake. The best way to actually visualize it is using the OneLake File Explorer. Have you heard of that yet?
I have. I've seen it. It terrifies me to my very soul, but it's pretty good. It's pretty slick as well.
Yeah, so it's essentially like a little lightweight MSI. You download just like you would download OneDrive, install it, and as soon as I have it installed, if I switch over to this, So as soon as I have it installed, it just shows up like it's OneDrive, just the same on the left hand in my file explorer, and it's the same in my toolbar as well. It's got a little icon. I can interact with it. It's not got the same level of granularity, at least at the moment, as OneDrive. But in here, you can see that's my workspaces. So now I start to get a little bit of a view of what the OneLake is and the data that I have access to within it. But we could have people in the company that have access to 6 other workspaces that I can't see, and someone else who has access to other workspaces, and that's where those domains come in. So for me, this is the OneLake. This is what I see. I can click into my UK sales workspace, and then that's me. I can start to see my Lakehouses, my data warehouses as well. And those are those data elements, and they're even tagged with the name of the lake house and then .lakehouse after it.
Okay,
which
so just
makes
so
it a
people
little
know
bit
what
easier.
we're seeing here. So when you open up your OneLake, you've got multiple different workspaces that you've got access to that contain some data. Because I think you had some other workspaces that you've created there that don't have data in it, which is why you're only seeing a couple here. As soon as some data in there, you'd see that workspace as just one of those root folders sitting in your OneLake in your file explorer. And then as you build artifacts, as you build lake houses, you build warehouses, you start to see this folder structure appear and get synced to your local machine, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
And when we say synced, it's just showing you what's there. They're not actually stored on your local machine. Much like OneDrive,
Yes.
It doesn't automatically download the entire lake onto your machine. It just shows you, hey, this is what's out there. And you can go and retrieve files from it if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. So I can go in and I can have a look at, like we were talking last time about the warehouse. So I can go in here, I can see tables, I can go into this, I can see the UK sales schema again, and the sales detail table. And now it's got the Delta log and it's got my Parquet files under the hood here. So that's great. You can see all of that stuff, but like if I'm storing things in Delta, I'm not really going to be adding Delta files here. And it starts to raise that question of like, it's great to have this kind of this overview and this view into my my Fabric environment, the OneLake, and have a view into my lake houses and warehouses and everything. But in terms of usability, like I can see this working out quite well if you are wanting to onboard data into your bronze lake house, for example, or whatever you're creating that kind of initial landing area for your data. But as you start to curate your data, it's going to be less likely that you want people adding files or kind of pulling things down, especially as Delta. There's not much I can do with these files sitting on a Windows machine.
And that's it, right? I mean, so I've been working with Delta and Parquet and Lakes for a long time, many, many years. Have you ever manually added a Parquet file to a Delta table?
I would not like to try that, no.
If I find out that you have, there'll be trouble. But I mean, that raises an interesting question, right? It's because of all the data, whether it's coming from RealTime, whether it's coming from the warehouse or the lake house, or anything that gets put in there is going to be stored as Delta. And we're saying you basically never access those files directly. Because if you do, it doesn't go through the Delta log. It doesn't do all the good transaction stuff. It doesn't do all the whole stats gathering point of Delta. So it's useful to be able to see things and browse it. But how often will we see people actually using this to explore the curated, the good Delta table parts of the thing? I don't think particularly often. Especially because they're going to be quite big. You could have gigabytes, terabytes of data stored there. You definitely don't want to sync that down to your local machine.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we're going to see essentially workspaces which are like locked down. People don't have access to it. They are kind of like engineered, right? The same way we do with the lake. Currently, we have the layers of our lake. We don't give people right access to that. You can't just open up a lake and put data in there. So you have like areas of the lake which are controlled and engineered and almost like a certified data set in Power BI, right? You have things that are governed and centrally produced by, say centrally, by the expert, the champion inside that domain, or a central data team, or however you're organized. But then you'd have additional workspaces where people have access, and they might be dropping in files, as you say, in the kind of landing area or reference files, augmenting their data with some other stuff. Absolutely, just drop some files in. That'll work nicely. Just people don't expect to go and edit Delta tables through this thing, please.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the really interesting things that I quite like about this view, though, and especially relevant when you're kind of talking about that bronze layer, is kind of calling back to the previous video we where we covered data warehouses, and I can show this in more detail inside Fabric. But if I come into this bronze lake house and I go to the tables, I can see I've got this NYC taxi folder structure. Now, we talked about this in the last video, and the NYC taxi data is actually a shortcut to a separate data lake storage Gen 2 location. But if I click through all of these, I go into one of these partitions and go all the way down, and I pick the one that's empty. Oh no, there it is. Just took a minute. I can actually see some files in here, and it looks like that's there. It looks like it's part of OneLake, but it's not. It's somewhere else.
Yep.
So that's pretty interesting how it's completely seamless. It's like you don't have like, oh, here's a placeholder because this is stored somewhere else. You have that view as if that is just part of your OneLake.
Yeah, it's nice. I think when we were first saying this is what Fabric is, we talked a little bit about essentially the OneLake not being OneLake, but it's more of a virtualization layer. So you can stitch together your own Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2s, your own S3 buckets. If you've got 10 lakes sitting around your organization, you can make it essentially associate them all, add shortcuts to those various areas. And then it does feel like you got one lake, and it actually looks through the Explorer like it's a single lake, despite being as many lakes as you actually needed under the hood. Yeah, makes sense. Nice.
Yeah, so just to prove that as well, if I go back to UK sales, I can come to my UK sales bronze lake house, and then I can see this NYC taxi has that little shortcut icon to it because it is a shortcut. It doesn't actually reside in the OneLake.
Very cool.
Yeah, so
the other question.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is going to be our OneLake, if this is going to be the lake that we have, how do we use it elsewhere? How do we use it as a lake? What if we're not accessing the data through Fabric? We've shown you can access data outside of Fabric and bring that in. Can you bring it out?
Yeah. So obviously we've been working entirely in Fabric here, but if I switch to this other tab, I'm in Databricks now, and just passing in that OneLake path. So if I jump back to Fabric briefly, looking at this table in particular, I can right click and go to properties, and I've got that ABFS path, and I can grab that, and that takes me to that specific location. So I can set that a leaf higher. I can set that to that kind of higher level and not necessarily down to that specific table. But I can use that as a variable, and then I can pass that through and actually just load that data. I can write to that table. I can work with it entirely as if it was just another storage account.
That's cool. Very cool. I'm going to ask the question that we only figured out just before this video. Why has it got a weird GUID name where some of the Microsoft demos have got a lovely, nice name inside your OneLake path?
Yeah, so I originally thought this was because we weren't quite special enough, but in reality, it's because of the naming of the workspace. So I've named my workspace a nice, user-friendly UK space sales, and that has caused it to generate a GUID. So if I switch to a workspace that is properly named, expenses, and it doesn't have any spaces in it, I can go into this lake house, and I can go to tables and do properties, and I can see that it's got a proper name here. So expenses at OneLake, and then it's got /raw.lakehouse for the name of the lake house.
Which makes entire sense. We're not special. We were just we didn't realize that the workspace name was going to be plucked up and essentially used as the container name, right?
Yeah.
So we can see in ADLS, every time you've got a new workspace, it's essentially just a new container. And that container is called whatever you have. Container names and storage names can't have spaces. So if you want to have your links looking nice, then don't have spaces in your workspace names. Have underscores. Do underscores even work? I'm not sure.
I'll find out in 10 minutes.
We'll find out. But if you don't mind, then call it something, with spaces, and make it user pretty. But just be aware, as people try and access it from outside of OneLake, they're going to have a big old GUID, which no one really cares because they shouldn't constantly be referring to the full ABFS path anyway. But just be aware of it, I guess, as you're getting started. Why does it have a funny name? Because you had a space, because you're trying to be nice.
Exactly. And it was hard finding an example where it didn't have any spaces in there.
Right.
I mean, jumping back to, if I switch back to my other workspace, and we take a look at those Lakehouses again, like we saw what our files look like from a file explorer perspective, but like looking at the tables in here, I can right click on these as well, and I can go into view files. So I can see a little bit of that information in the actual UI. I mean, I don't know what I can really do with that there. There's not really much I would want to do with the kind of file view other than kind of looking at the properties and potentially pulling out specific paths. If I do the same, or if I look at the same perspective from my warehouse, so we've got tables in the warehouse, but remember, we've got that different persona, that different engine. We've got the SQL engine here. And look at that table. I don't have that same capability to look at those files. Although, as we demonstrated, we can dig down in the file explorer and actually look at the files within there.
Yeah, so any which way, we can go and have a poke around the Delta log. We can go and have a look at the actual files. I guess if you're getting into real performance tuning and you're trying to look for skew in your Parquet files, you're trying to look for good distributions, you're trying to see if optimizers actually worked and you've got a decent spread of Parquet files inside your Delta table. But you could also just do that from the SQL layer on the Spark side. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely incredibly useful for the business bringing their own data to the party. There's massive use cases for actually making it super easy to extend the lake with people's own data. How useful is it being able to actually go and view the Delta tables? We'll see. We'll find out.
Yeah.
All right, very cool. Anything else you want to show us, or is that our tour of the OneLake?
No, that was everything. As I said at the start, it's very hidden, it's very abstracted away, and you've just got these kind of points where you kind of get a feel for what's under the hood and what you have access to. But it's one of those things where for a tenant, there is OneLake, and that's it. That's going to cover everybody, even if someone sees a completely different view of it because they have access to a completely different set of workspaces. It is essentially all just OneLake per tenant.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking on this introductory tour. I know there's going to be a flood of questions around, but what about? And we know there's loads of questions. There's questions that we've not answered yet. We're going to get lots of things. I've certainly seen questions around, how does it work? Is it the same as OneDrive in that it keeps version history and file history and versions of things? And honestly, I don't know. I've not really dug into the backup, the disaster recovery, the can you choose geo-replication, all the things that we're doing on Lake. How does that work in Fabric? The more detailed security layer. Currently, you can set security at the Lakehouse layer, but at the workspace layer. But what about actually deeper and granularity and folder-based security and all the stuff we'd have to do painstakingly with access control lists and ACLs in the Lake? There's still tons and tons of questions out there. We're scratching the surface in terms of how it works. We'll dig into all those things about how you structure things for good security based on how it currently works. And then as we go through the preview, there's going to be more and more things in terms of adding that in. They've already shown big pictures of what security might look like, and as we're going to see that emerge throughout the preview. So, yeah, bear with us with the questions. Fire your questions at us. It's just we might go, we don't know yet. We'll see. All right. Thanks for joining us, Craig. Catch you next time.
Cheers.
All right. So, the OneLake. Essentially, lots and lots of containers stitched to a workspace, attached to lots and lots of ADLS Gen 2 accounts, or a single account, or who really cares? We can't really see it. Accessible both through Fabric itself, through all the different experiences in Fabric. It's there sitting underneath, whether or not it's immediately visible, or whether or not you can dig into it and kind of right-click, see files, and actually see those things. You can always see it through your file explorer. We've now got the OneLake for Windows. You can just install it and start browsing your lake, which terrifies the living daylights out of me, but has massive use cases for your business user. So many things in there as to how it actually works and what we can see going. So, yeah. Pretty cool. that is all I want to go through today. So, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time digging into the next experience. Cheers.